seeking Nessie, a legend across the ages. Chapter 1 is Saint Columba's encounter, a 6th century. The mist rose off the water in wispy tendrils, snaking through the cool morning air. Saint Columba stood at the edge of Loch Ness, peering into its mysterious depths. The glassy surface revealed nothing of what lurked beneath, though ripples hinted at some great disturbance far below. As the first rays of dawn crested the rolling hills surrounding the loch, the village began to stir. Men and women emerged from their timber and thatched dwellings, wraith-like through the fading gloom. They gathered on the shore to join Columba, faces etched with worry and fear. For weeks now, an ill omen had plagued the village. Livestock slain in the night, fish snatched from the nets of waiting coracles. Whispers spread of a vengeful water beast, awakened from centuries of slumber to wreak havoc upon the land walkers. The villagers left offerings of meat and meat along the banks to appease the creature, yet still it was not satisfied. Now the beast had taken a man, dragged flailing and helpless into the depths as he drew water from the loch. The monster would not be placated. Its wrath would doom them all. Columba turned to face the villagers, raising his hands to quiet their murmurs. "Your fears are not unwarranted," he said, voice booming out across the still water. "A devil dwells here, that much is clear, but it wields only the power we allow it. Faith shall shield us from harm." At this, Columba strode into one of the waiting coracles, taking up a paddle and pushing away from shore. Cries erupted from the onlookers. "Turn back, it's not safe," implored a woman, clutching her child close. But Columba did not heed her warning. With steady strokes he paddled toward the center of the loch, chanting rhythmic prayers under his breath. Closer he drew to the depths where dread things lurked, trusting in the Lord to deliver him from evil. There was a sudden churning in the water, and Columba ceased his paddling. An enormous humpback broke the surface, scales glinting in the rising sun. The head of the creature followed, water streaming down its long, tapering neck. It fixed Columba with a baleful eye, jaw cracking open to reveal a cavernous maw lined with fangs longer than a man's arm. The monster let out an ear-splitting roar, sending waves smashing into Columba's coracle. But Columba did not cower or plead before the beast. Instead, he brandished his wooden cross, continuing his prayers in a clear, unwavering voice. "You shall plague these gentle people no more," he commanded. "Return now to the depths from whence you came." The creature thrashed in fury, spewing water and foam. Yet it did not advance. As Columba's prayers rang out across the water, the beast's fury seemed to ebb. Its serpentine neck lowered in submission, and slowly, the creature began to sink once more beneath the waves. The water stilled. Columba let out a long breath and then turned his coracle back toward shore. A cheer rose up from the onlookers as he stepped onto solid ground again, having returned unharmed from the very jaws of the beast. "Your faith has saved us this day," said an elder, bowing his head. "The monster will not trouble us again." Columba held up a hand. "Do not think it tame. Such evil cannot be quelled forever. Only the light of God can keep it at bay." He gazed back out at the now placid water. "As long as your faith remains strong, it shall sleep peaceful in the deep, but if it falters, the beast will rise once more." The villagers crossed themselves and murmured prayers of thanks. Columba bid them keep faith through the coming days of darkness ahead. For he knew, even then, that this was not the last the world would see of the monster of Loch Ness. Chapter 2 is Spreading Lore, Medieval Era. A chill wind howled over Urquhart Castle, carrying with it the scent of the loch's icy waters. Sir Bedivere pulled his fur cloak tighter as he strode along the parapets, nodding to the guards standing vigil against the creeping night. All seemed still, and yet a faint unease needled at him. Since boyhood, Bedivere had heard the whispered tales around peat fires, of a great water beast with breath like rot and fangs longer than broadswords. A devil that lurked beneath the tranquil surface of Loch Ness, preying upon any souls foolish enough to wander too close to its domain. Most dismiss these as fanciful stories invented to scare children into obedience. But Bedivere had never forgotten that glint of real fear in the elder's eyes. A shudder ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He gazed out across the rippling waters of the loch, steeling himself as the murky depths seemed to stare back. What ancient evil glided through those shadowed waters, shielded by night's veil? A flickering light caught his eye near the water's edge. Peering down, he spied a circle of villagers gathered around a great bonfire, head bowed in ceremony. Bedivere recalled it was an auspicious night, the winter solstice, when the divide between worlds grew thin. A night when offerings must be made to appease the fair folk and other beasts who walked between worlds. He watched as the villagers cast trinkets and prepared game into the fire, followed by prayers spoken in the ancient tongue. The flames leaped high, sparks spiraling upward into the black and starless sky. Bedivere knew these offerings were not meant solely for fair folk. The Loch's demon would demand its tithe this night as well. Just then, a terrified scream rent the air. Bedivere grasped the pommel of his sword and raced along the parapet, eyes scanning for the source. The firelight below illuminated a scene of chaos, villagers scattering in all directions as a massive creature hauled its bulk from the water. Bedivere froze, unable to comprehend the horror before his eyes. The beast was impossible in scale, near the size of a draft horse, with a serpentine neck and hulking body. Its gnarled limbs ended in curved claws, which it used to drag itself onto land in pursuit of the hapless villagers. A long, flat tail whipped behind it, striking the ground and leaving deep gouges in the mud. The monster's head swung low, jagged jaws gaping as it snapped at the fleeing people. Bedivere could only watch, paralyzed, as it snatched a man screaming from the ground and dragged him beneath the churning water. At last, Bedivere found the will to move. He raced down the steps of the parapet, shouting for his men to arm themselves and saddle the horses. Whatever devilry this beast was, he would not let it take another soul this night. The knights assembled in the courtyard, weapons and torches glinting in the fire glow. Bedivere led them out the castle gates toward the loch's shore, eyes searching for any ripples heralding the monster's approach. But the waters lay smooth as glass, with no hint of the horror that had emerged just moments before. The beast had returned to the depths just as swiftly as it had risen. The knights scouted the shore by firelight, discovering only trampled ground and drag marks leading into the water. The terrified villagers huddled nearby, begging the knights' protection from the demon's fury. Bedivere gazed across the black expanse of the loch, a cold fist of dread closing around his heart. He knew then the old tales were true. An ancient evil dwelled here, as old as the land itself. They had foolishly disturbed its slumber, and there would be a bloody price to pay in the days ahead. "Double the guard," he ordered, turning back toward the castle, away from the endless dark waters. "And bring the villagers inside the walls. We must prepare for this devil's wrath." Bedivere sent riders to spread word of the beast and warnings, not to stray near the loch after nightfall. Yet he knew barricades and armies would not stop it if roused to anger. It could only pray to keep it sleeping peaceful in the deep, and hope the coming days did not bring bloody proof that their prayers had gone unheard. Chapter 3. Renewed Interest in 1933. George Spicer pulled his Morris automobile off the road, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. "Blasted thing," he muttered, climbing out to check the engine. The roadster had been sputtering and overheating ever since they left Inverness that morning. Now plumes of steam hissed from beneath the dented bonnet. His wife Cecilia glanced anxiously up the narrow road running alongside the loch. It was deserted, not another soul in sight. The barren moorlands stretched bleakly all around them, swallowed up by the gloom of fading twilight. No place to be stranded come nightfall. "Darling, do hurry," she called. "I don't fancy waiting out here after dark." George tugged at his collar, the car's steaming radiator only adding to the thickening heat of early summer. The sky hung low, hinting at storms gathering over distant Ben Nevis. Whether to rouse the ghosts lurking in Highland lochs, or so the old tales went. But George set little store by such nonsense. Giving the engine one last check, he slammed down the bonnet. "Right then, let's be off. If we push her a bit, I wager we'll limp along too." His words died at Cecilia's scream. Whirling around, he followed her wide-eyed stare toward the loch. Only 100 yards offshore, a tremendous beast was lumbering up from the water onto the muddy bank. George's breath seized in his chest. The creature was like something out of childhood nightmares, a monstrous thing of scales and spines, fleshy ridges running the length of its colossal body. Its thick neck curved downward, serpent-like, into a face filled with gnashing teeth and soulless black eyes. The beast paused at the water's edge, swaying as if gathering its bearings. George remained frozen, unable to accept the vision before his eyes. Some primitive reptile, long extinct yet miraculously still prowling Highland waters after eons lost in time. With a guttural rumble, the creature began shambling across the shoreline, its ponderous body radiating menace. Only when it reached the road, no more than 30 yards from where George and Cecilia stood, did George regain his wits. "Get in the car now." They dove into the roadster, fumbling to lock the doors with trembling hands. The beast lumbered past, paying them no mind, its splayed feet leaving muddy tracks on the road surface. As it crossed, George glimpsed ridged spikes running along its spine, caked with mud and slime. A living fossil from Scotland's primordial past. The creature reached the opposite shore, then slithered down the bank and into the water with a mighty splash. George numbly turned the ignition, fighting to steady his shaking hands. With a cough, the engine sputtered to life. "Thank God," Cecilia gasped as George slammed the car into gear. The tires spun, spewing gravel as he floored the accelerator. The roadster shot forward, Lake Loch rapidly dwindling behind them. Neither spoke until the sight was far behind. George finally glanced at Cecilia. Her face was bloodless, eyes glassy with shock. He reckoned his own looked much the same. "Christ alive," he muttered. "Did you see, was it?" Cecilia nodded, her throat working convulsively. "Let's just get back to the hotel," she whispered. "We can telephone the authorities in the morning. They'll know what to make of such a beast." She turned again to peer out the rear window, as if fearing the creature might come galloping up the road behind them. George's mind still reeled, trying to accept what he'd witnessed. Either they had both lost their senses, or he had stumbled upon a discovery to shake modern science to its core. The thought left him light-headed. What in God's name had they unleashed upon the world this night? News spread swiftly through the remote highlands. Calls flooded into Inverness Constabulary reporting unusual activity in Loch Ness, great wakes sighted cutting across the water, fishing equipment damaged, and small boats overturned. The loch's placid surface hid shocking secrets, it seemed. Reporters journeyed north, hungry for details on what fanciful headlines were calling the Beast of Loch Ness. As eyewitness accounts filtered out, speculation grew feverish. A modern-day dragon? A dinosaur relic somehow still stalking Scotland's lakes? Some previously undiscovered species of giant eel, even a wayward whale, offered skeptical academics. Whatever the truth, the world was watching. On the shore of Loch Ness, newly minted monster hunters now kept constant vigil, cameras and binoculars at the ready. Hotels filled with journalists and curiosity seekers, business owners quick to capitalize on the phenomenon. For a brief spell after the gloomy years of the Great War, a new mystery gripped the public imagination. Among locals, opinions remained divided. Had the Spicers simply glimpsed a deer or an elk crossing the road, distorted by shadows and imagination? Or was a real lake monster finally revealing itself after centuries of haunting their waters unseen? Life along the loch returned to its easy rhythm, filtered sunlight glinting on the water once more. But denizens of the village pubs flopped rumors of recent sightings in hushed voices, a gleam lighting their eyes. Beneath the joke and laughter, an uneasy prickle of wonder and fear needled at them. For who knew what yet lurked in those cold, deep waters? Had their ancient nemesis finally returned to haunt them again? Chapter 4. A Quest for Proof in 1960s/70s. Tim Dinsdale adjusted the focus on his cine camera, squinting through the viewfinder at the choppy expanse of Loch Ness. It was a blustery April afternoon, sunlight dappling the steep hills framing the loch's slate-gray waters. By all appearances, an ordinary day in the Scottish highlands. But Dinsdale hadn't braved the capricious spring weather purely for the scenery. He was hunting for monsters. It had been over 30 years now since that infamous sighting by the Spicers kick-started Nessie fever worldwide. Thousands had flocked here since, cameras ready, hoping to capture proof of the elusive creature's existence. Most came away disappointed, with only shaky photographs of ripples to show for their efforts. But a few tantalizing images kept belief alive. Now Dinsdale aimed to finally put the question to rest, and his 16mm camera would provide the answer. Peering through the viewfinder, he searched for any unusual movements in the choppy gray water. A seemingly impossible task, like spotting a needle in a haystack. But Dinsdale possessed one advantage others lacked. He had witnessed the creature himself. In 1960, during an earlier expedition to Loch Ness, he had spotted a huge animate shape plowing through the water. Dark humps rose from the surface, trailed by an enormous wake. He had stood transfixed, watching the creature swim half a mile up the loch before submerging again. The fleeting sighting filled him with purpose. He would not rest until he brought back photographic evidence for the world to see. A white speck out on the loch caught his eye, snapping him back to the present. Refocusing the lens, he made out a small fishing boat battling the churning waves. If he was lucky, it might flush his quarry out from hiding. He zoomed in on the boat, watching and waiting. Without warning, a great commotion erupted in the water nearby. Dinsdale swung the camera toward it just as a massive curving neck broke the surface. His breath caught. After so many fruitless days, the creature had appeared at last. Moving on instinct, he pressed the record button, fighting to hold the camera steady. The long neck thrashed amidst the waves, then slowly submerged. Dinsdale kept filming until it disappeared back into the murky depths. Hands trembling, he stopped the camera and hurriedly rewound the film. Those few precious seconds of footage could change history, if the quality was clear enough. Back in his makeshift lab, Dinsdale developed the film with painstaking care. The process seemed to take ages, but finally he held the finished reel up to the light. There it was, the creature's unmistakable form rising from the loch, neck undulating, exactly as he recalled seeing it. This was the proof he had sought for so long. He raced to contact the news media, scarcely able to contain his excitement. Their reaction was even beyond his hopes. His footage featured in newspapers and broadcasts the world over as dramatic evidence that the Loch Ness monster did indeed exist. Nessie was real. In the wake of Dinsdale's revelation, the hunt intensified. Amateurs and university researchers alike flocked to Loch Ness, employing every resource in their zeal to find the creature. Boats equipped with underwater cameras and echo-sounding equipment crisscrossed the murky waters. Lookout posts with telephoto lenses lined the loch day and night. The results were tantalizing, though frustratingly inconclusive. Sonar scans detected large underwater movements, unlike any known fish. More sightings occurred, along with occasional surface photographs of an unknown animal. But the creature remained elusive. Skeptics increasingly called Nessie a fantasy, just circus sideshow fodder. But Dinsdale knew otherwise. He had looked into that beast's eye through his camera lens. This was no myth. Some unknown leviathan still lurked in Loch Ness's shadowed depths. And he would not stop until he dragged it into the light at last, no matter how long the search took. Where others grew discouraged, he remained undaunted. One day, the creature's secrets would be his. Chapter 5. A Legend Endures, 1980-90s. The tour bus rumbled along the winding road encircling Loch Ness, the guide's voice crackling through the speakers. If you look to your left, you can see the ruins of Urquhart Castle, he droned in a disinterested tone. And to the right. Roberta gazed out at the loch's steely waters, only half listening. She and her niece Aileen had made this pilgrimage to Scotland's famous loch more out of a sense of whimsy than any real belief in monsters. But peering into the cold gloom of the lake's depths, Roberta couldn't suppress a delicious shiver of anticipation. Could there truly be some unknown leviathan lurking in those murky waters, defying decades of searches? Your attention, please, called the guide. We're approaching the site of our sonar monster hunt. Be on the lookout for any unusual movements or disturbances on the loch's surface. Eagerly, the passengers crowded the windows, smartphones and cameras at the ready. Roberta frowned. The once pristine loch shoreline was now littered with gift shops and tourist buses. High-tech sonar gadgets droned in the water, more concerned with entertaining fanny pack-wearing visitors than serious investigation. She sighed, nostalgia creeping in for the early days of breathless mystery and excitement surrounding the Loch Ness monster phenomenon. Turning to Aileen, she asked, "Do you really think old Nessie still hides in there, with all this ruckus going on?" Aileen chewed her lip, considering. Just then, a violent bubbling roiled the water's surface directly ahead. Excited murmurs broke out through the bus. The guide grabbed his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have activity. I need everyone to keep calm and quiet." All eyes were glued to the frothing water as something large and dark slowly rose toward the surface. Cameras flashed incessantly. Roberta found herself leaning forward, heart racing. When the object fully broke the surface, a collectively disappointed groan went through the bus. It was only a prop, a fake Nessie head on a mechanical rig. Roberta slumped back into her seat. Just another hokey gimmick for the tourist trade. As the guide laughingly announced it was all for show, Roberta gazed out at the Loch waters stretching to the horizon. She thought back to those grainy old photos that had first captured her imagination as a girl, the mysterious shape rising from the waves, poised between recognition and mystery. That magical tension had drawn her here today as much as any real hope of seeing a monster. But it seemed the true unknown had receded from these commodity-soaked banks long ago. Aileen patted her arm. "Don't worry, Auntie, maybe Nessie's still out there hiding, somewhere tourists can't reach. They can't tame every mystery." Roberta smiled. "I suppose you're right, dear. A bit of mystery makes the world a more magical place. We have to keep a little room for belief in the unknown." She turned her eyes back to the Loch. Its surface had stilled again, yielding no more secrets. But perhaps that was for the best. Let Nessie keep its solitude, undisturbed by the modern world. Somewhere, beneath the murk and endless ripples, the magic yet endured. Chapter 6. Enduring Belief, Present Day. The first pale rays of dawn illuminated the dock where Jamie stood, sipping his tea. Another day, breaking calm and still upon Loch Ness, unchanged through the centuries. The Loch gave up its secrets reluctantly even to the locals, though Jamie's family roots here reached back generations. Stories of the Loch Ness monster, affectionately called Nessie, had peppered Jamie's childhood. His granddad swore he'd glimpsed it once out fishing, while Uncle Duncan spun wild tales of close encounters after a few pints at the pub. Jamie had soaked up their stories wide-eyed, never doubting monsters could dwell in the Loch's isolated vastness. But in the intervening years since, colder reason had moved in. He studied biology at university, learning of evolution's patient workings and extinction's inevitability. Childhood's magical thinking faded. And yet, whenever mist shrouded the Loch's surface, some lingering doubt nagged at him. What if science did not have all the answers? These waters still held secrets, he was certain. Jamie's musings were interrupted by the crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up, he saw a mud-splattered Land Rover pull into the dock. Two men in khakis climbed out, obviously not locals. Americans, by the sound of their accents. Tourists chasing legends, no doubt. He nodded in greeting as they approached. "You'll be needing a boat then, eh?" "Yes, indeed," said the older man. He had a bushy gray beard and a weathered face that spoke of many days spent outdoors. "Name's Jack Begley. This here's my son Travis. We wanted to spend a few days searching the Loch firsthand, see if we can spot your famous monster." Jamie raised an eyebrow, suppressing a smirk. More amateur cryptozoologists, imagining they'd succeed where so many others had failed. But their money was as good as anyone's. "Old Nessie's never been one for appearances," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "But you're welcome to look. What boat will you be needing?" After settling on a modest-sized craft with sonar, Jamie watched the pair put her off across the Loch, scanning intently for any signs of disturbance. He envied their enthusiasm, recalling his own youthful passion for solving mysteries. But Nessie's secrets would not come easily. Over the next few days, Jamie observed the pair's efforts from afar, through his telescope, as he went about his guiding business. They explored every inlet and depth, handsomely equipped with the latest gadgets and tech. But each night they returned tired and empty-handed to the docks. On the last morning, Jamie arrived to find them packing up their gear, faces grim with defeat. He sauntered over. "Any luck with your search, then?" Jack shook his head ruefully. Can't say there was. I really thought our sonar would turn up something, but all Nessie's a tricky one. That's for sure. Jamie nodded. I'll wager this loch has secrets we'll never unravel. You still believe the monster's really out there? Travis asked, a note of hope in his voice. Jamie gazed out across the calm water and saw the ghost of his younger self still keeping watch, unwilling to relinquish the mystery. He smiled. I reckon I do. Nature has surprises left for us yet. The day we stop believing in wonders is the day magic leaves the world for good. The men clapped his shoulder, bidding a fond farewell. Jamie watched their taillights recede and let out a contented breath. Another day ended with the endless loch undisturbed. He hoped it would ever remain so. Chapter 7. Investigating the Evidence. Josh adjusted his headset as the Zoom call connected, revealing a cluttered office across the screen. The bespectacled man on the other end grinned in greeting. Josh Stevens, I presume, Dr. Charles Paxton, cryptozoologist, at your service. Josh smiled back. As a journalist investigating the Loch Ness monster, speaking to one of the world's foremost experts on the subject was a vital step. And Dr. Paxton's enthusiasm felt infectious even through a computer screen. Dr. Paxton, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I wanted to get your take on the most compelling evidence around the Loch Ness monster. What sightings or data stick out as truly inexplicable in your view? Dr. Paxton steepled his fingers, eyes twinkling. Excellent question, as you know. The vast majority of supposed sightings can be discarded outright as misidentified animals or outright hoaxes, but there remain a handful of intriguing cases that give one pause. He rummaged through the papers on his desk, retrieving a file folder. Here, for instance, is the famous surgeon's photograph taken in 1934 by respected physician, Dr. Kenneth Wilson. It shows what appears to be a large animal with a lengthy neck emerging from the water. While later revealed to be a toy model attached to a submarine, the image spurred massive public interest at the time. Ah, yes, I've seen that one, said Josh. A shame it was proven a fake later on. Are there any photographs that have stood up to scrutiny? Dr. Paxton nodded eagerly. Indeed, a few have withstood analysis. This one here, taken in 1972 by an American patent lawyer near Urquhart Castle, shows an animal with an elongated neck that's difficult to explain away. Similarly, this underwater photo from 2007 shows a large flipper-like shape. These help substantiate eyewitness accounts. Very interesting, Josh murmured, jotting notes. And what about sonar readings or scientific data? Now that's where things get truly fascinating, said Dr. Paxton. He slid a paper across the desk. These sonar traces from the 1970s track an exceptionally large animate object moving against the currents at significant speed. Its profile doesn't match any known species. Josh studied the sonar images. Whatever the creature was, it seemed chillingly real on the clinical graphs and charts. The data supporting an unknown animal is compelling, he said. Why do you think more conclusive proof still remains elusive? Dr. Paxton spread his hands. Loch Ness' sheer size and depth make it extraordinarily difficult to monitor. This creature, if it exists, is rare and intelligent enough to avoid detection. Like many legends, it waits patiently to reveal itself only to the worthy. He arched an eyebrow. But I have faith humanity will unlock the mystery one day. Josh leaned back, feeling he had ample material to dive into. Well, thank you again for your expertise. You've given me some fascinating leads to chase down. As the call ended, Josh reviewed his notes, rekindling his boyhood excitement over the Loch Ness mystery. While cold facts remained slim, humanity's boundless capacity to believe and wonder yet pulled at him. If he spun this tale just right, perhaps it could awaken that dormant sense of marvel within his readers too. Chapter 8. Keeping Stories Alive. An eerie mist enveloped the shore of Loch Ness near the village of Drumnadrochit. Tendrils of vapor reached like ghostly fingers across the otherwise tranquil water. It was a quintessential Scottish scene that seemed to carry one back through the veils of time. Seated on the pebbled beach, gazing out into the mist-shrouded lake, were two figures, an old man and a girl of about 10 years old. The man appeared to be recounting a story, while the girl listened in rapt attention. "So you see, dear Katie, it has gone by many names. The water kelpie, the sea serpent, the water horse, the monster of Loch Ness, but all who dwell near these lands know it by one name, Nessie." Katie hugged her knees tighter to her chest, eyes wide. "Have you ever seen Nessie yourself, Granda?" The old man chuckled. "Nay, though as a lad your age I searched these banks 1,000 times, hoping to spy that dread neck and hump rising from the waves. As so many wonders, otters, seals, even the great northern divers paddling across the loch. But never the monster itself." "Do you think it's really real then?" the girl asked. "Well now, the stories have lived in these parts for hundreds of years. Since before even my granda walked this earth, our people do love spinning a fine tale," he said with a wink. "But every legend holds a seed of truth." He gazed out over the steely water, seeing past the misty veil into days of yore. "We'll likely never know if some primordial beast yet lurks in the deep, waiting to reveal itself again. But I'll tell you this, the fortunes of this village and others have rested on that legend since ancient times. It draws seekers and tourists from across the globe, wanting to believe in hidden wonders. Nessie is etched into the land here, as much a part of our home as the heather and the rocks." Katie nodded slowly, pondering his words. Just then a flock of geese burst from the loch's surface, honking noisily. Katie gasped and grabbed her granddad's arm. "Och, you'll not get a look at Nessie that easily," he teased, hugging her. "Our mascot guards its secrets as tightly as we Highlanders do." The mist was dissipating now as the late afternoon sun filtered through, gilding the water's surface in molten gold. Katie took her granddad's hand and together they ambled back down the shore towards town, the timeless loch watching their retreat. Another day waning at Loch Ness, its enigma left undisturbed. But the tales would continue on, ensuring the mystery survived in imaginations young and old. Epilogue. Night hung heavy over Drumnadrochit. Down at the pub, laughing voices leaked through the locked door along with the warm glow of lanterns. The rest of the village street lay dark and deserted, storefronts shuttered for the night. A lone figure hurried down the cobbled road, collar turned against the chill air. He was just past the post office when he heard it. A faint cry seemed to echo across the loch's black water. He froze, listening. Had it been his imagination? Only silence followed. Shivering, he quickened his pace. As he neared the last dock, another sound drifted from out of the gloom. A soft splash, like something large breaking the water's surface. This time he knew it was no figment. Peering into the darkness, he glimpsed a pale shape undulating in the lake beyond the pier. Straining his eyes, he traced the serpentine curves of a long neck and spined body churning just below the surface. Lantern light glinted off reptilian hide as the beast slowly swam north, sending ripples spreading in its wake. The man clutched the post office railing to steady himself, pulse racing. Only when the shape sank back into the depths, disappearing as if it had never been, did he stagger back onto the road. He reached the pub in a daze and pushed through the door into light and warmth. The publican called out a greeting as he took his usual stool at the bar. "You're looking a bit peaky there, Angus. The usual to put some color back in your cheeks?" Angus nodded mutely as a whiskey was slid before him. He took a bracing swig, willing his hands to be still. "Mac, what say you to a moonlight stroll along the docks when you close up tonight? There's something I must share, that only those who know this loch well as kin will truly understand." The publican eyed him curiously. "What's this about then?" Angus leaned in, voice hushed. "It began with a cry that seemed to come from across the water. Then before my own eyes I saw it." He broke off as a gasp went through the crowded pub. All jovial talk ceased. The locals stared, transfixed, as the impossible tale spilled from his lips. Out on the loch, the gentle waters lay undisturbed once more. But sleeping beneath the stars, the townsfolk dreamt of mysteries drifting up from the deep. The end.